bounty hunters. We don't need that scum.
Yes, sir.
Welcome back to Propology 101. And today I want to move to a costume. We normally talk about blasters and stuff like that, but we've never really talked about, except for the first episode, where we talked about all the Revell engine pieces that were on the Hoth Rebel Trooper costume and blasters. But today I want to talk about Bossk and his costume, because it's kind of an important costume for multiple reasons. And the first reason is it's a piece of aviation history. During the 50s and 60s, the British government started experimenting with pressure suits, high altitude suits. The reason why a pilot would need a pressure suit, or they theorized jet pilots would need a pressure suit, was the altitude. The less atmosphere we have, less pressure on the body, we boil, our blood boils. It's not boiling from heat. It's boiling the same way your soda pop boils when you pop the cap and release the pressure, and the CO2 starts to release. Well, through all this work, they experimented and created many different suits. And one of the suits, or a series of suits, are also known as the Windac suits. I know multiple companies were involved in the creation of these suits. I'm not sure exactly where the name Windac comes from, unless it's some sort of a combination of company names or maybe a place or location. But anyway, these suits were made, tested, experimented with, only to be later dropped, because it turns out we don't need pressure suits until we get into a plane like the U-2 spy plane or the SR-71, something that's going way, way up there. In those altitudes, you need a pressure suit. And also NASA here in the United States, we were doing a lot of experiments also with the Man High project. We were sending guys up in balloons way up in the air, and they wore pressure suits. Now we know why it's historically important. Let's get down to why it's important to Star Wars. Right off the bat, looking at Bossk's costume, you will notice that it's very similar to the X-Wing pilot costumes that are from A New Hope. Now, Bossk shows up in Empire Strikes Back, but obviously the suits, original suits, influenced the creation of the X-Wing pilot suits. And actually, it still influences all Star Wars pilot suits for the most part, especially for the Rebels. They all still end up having a white flak vest, escape harnesses around the legs, whether they're outside the legs or inside the legs, they still mimic the same look. Let's talk about a few of the pieces of the suit that we see on Bossk's suit. And the first thing is that white vest. In Star Wars, it's called the flak vest. What that does on the Windac suit is when the suit is pressurized, that white vest keeps the upper torso from ballooning out. Mobility gets lost. Basically, all your limbs want to go straight, your legs want to go straight, and your torso wants to go straight. And that leads us to another piece we see on the Bossk suit. If you look right in front here, there's a box with a handle off the box, and then cable coming down from the neck, and another cable going down towards the legs, and then it branches off down by the legs. What that is for is when a pilot is seated in his airplane, there's a ratchet mechanism inside that box, and that's what that lever's for. So for him to stay seated when the suit inflates, they crank that, and the cables shorten and pulls the shoulders forward and the hips and the thighs upwards, so he can remain seated in an airplane. Another thing that's really cool about the Windac suit is this isn't its first rodeo. These suits, I believe, were first seen in a movie from 1964 called The First Men in the Moon. And you watch the movie, you can just watch the first 10 minutes of the movie, and you'll see every one of these suits, including the Bossk suit. Next, they're seeing an episode of Doctor Who called The Wheel in Space in 1968. And then, of course, Empire Strikes Back. But if you have a really keen eye, you'll see the Windac suits also in A New Hope. You'll see them in the cantina scene, and you won't just see one. You'll see the blue suit, and you'll also see the orange suit or the yellow suit. There were multiples of each one of these suits. So it may not have been the actual Bossk suit, but it very much well could have been. Now, let's talk about exactly what they did to make the Bossk spacesuit. So first thing, the X-Wing pilots and Bossk have a strip that goes down, it's webbing that goes down and hoops around the legs, and then it goes up the backside of the suit. What that is mimicking is an early pilot rescue harness. This harness was designed to be attached to the pilot's suit. So when you get rid of all the heavy gear, the parachute gear and all that other stuff, basically it's a harness that's lightweight, won't impede the pilot's movement, but all it is just a quick and easy rescue harness. That's why the loops go through the legs. So when it gets taken up and you put tension on it, those hoops will go right up and support the pilot as he's being lifted up. The next thing we see on Bossk that is really cool, the leg flares. Now, the leg flares that are used on Bossk are the exact same leg flares that are made for production that were used on the X-Wing pilots and Y-Wing pilots for A New Hope. And basically what those are, they're inspired by World War II German pilot leg flares. It was a common thing for German pilots to have a flare gun and a set of flares that would be attached to their leg down on their boot. And that is a look that we all know with the X-Wing pilot. And then, of course, Bossk, I believe Bossk has two sets of those, one on each leg. The next thing is it's a roll pin style buckle British military belt. This belt is probably the most, besides, let's say, the Imperial leather belt, probably the next most common belt you'll find in Star Wars is this canvas style roll pin belt buckle. It is seen on the A New Hope pilots. They wear a gray one or a silver one. Bossk is wearing one. Scarif Commandos or Marines from Rogue One, their costumes have it. It was a very common belt used by the British military, and what was cool about it, it came silver, white, navy blue, tan, and OD green. Those were the colors that same belt style came in. Now, this belt isn't in service anymore. In recent searches, I searched it just as recently as maybe 5 or 6 years ago. You could still get every color available, and usually they're about $20. They're still about between $20 and $25, but the most common colors you can find now are tan and OD green. But you can always find the buckles and buy the buckles for about $10 and then make your own colored belt, whichever you want. But that belt, along with the way they did the X-Wing, is they used the belt and then they sewn little hoops and inserted some metal and aluminum brass greeblies in there, just like they do for the X-Wing pilots. The same setup where they sew some hoops in and put some greeblies in the belt. They did the same thing for that costume. And then the next big thing is there's a red neck seal. We don't know what it's made of, but Bossk has this big seal. And basically that seal is sitting on top, or maybe even attached to the actual neck ring seal that seals with the high altitude helmet that goes with that suit. That's also an added piece. And then the most obvious thing they did with it is along the seams, the suit comes apart this way, probably for ease of putting the pilot in the suit. There's a seal where you could unzip and remove the arms, and you could do the same thing with the legs. This suit has integrated pressure boots. The boots are also integrated into the suit and are also pressurized. Those boots are put on with the lower, from like the knee down section of fabric is all there. So that is a quick rundown of the Bossk spacesuit or the Bossk costume and why it's significant to history and also why it's significant to Star Wars. And like I said, go back to A New Hope, go to the cantina scene, and you'll see one of the guys in the blue Windex suits when Obi-Wan cuts in and says, "Hey, I need a ride." Then in the background, a couple places, you'll see the other suit floating around. It's always fun to look for them and find them. It's 100% influences the look of the X-Wing costumes and the Y-Wing costumes from A New Hope and Rebel pilots all the way through till today. That inspiration goes back to that suit. The white flak vest, the belt, the harness, all that stuff, it all goes back to that suit. I think that's pretty cool. Matter of fact, I think if there were enough suits available, they probably would have outfitted all the Rebel pilots with that suit. It kind of looks like they wanted that suit for all their pilots, but couldn't do it. So they just went with the orange suits, made a flak vest, and went on with it. But anyway, join us next time when we pull out another prop, tear it down, and see what it's made of.